So, I asked about a week or two ago for people to give me evidence the Black Lives Matter was a majority hate group and all the violence done in their name were not just some random assholes being assholes. I got nothing. I got angry responses, one copy and paste of stats claiming they were a hate group because they were lying and here were the real stats about police violence, or asking ad nauseum about black on black crimes, like we shouldn't hold cops to a higher standard than criminals, and so many other things wrong with that argument. But they didn't directly discuss what I was asking for. Even if Black Lives Matter are lying or just confused and being wrong, it doesn't make them a hate group. If that was the case, the majority of religions would be considered a hate group, as would political parties, as there can only be one truth and the rest are liars. Being a hate group has very real measures and standards. Black Lives Matter does not meet that, especially as it is more a banner and less an organization, as I mentioned earlier. If Black Lives Matter is a hate group, then so is the Catholic Church sex abuse victims. The police department shuffles around their most racist and violent cops to other precincts when the heat gets too bad, and they cover it up, until that person snaps and usually kills someone. Then they demand blind faith from the public. They villainize the victims and refuse to admit fault just for PR as opposed to fixing the actual problem, exactly like the Catholic Church. Also, the FBI reports that unlike the military, there is no screening to block or remove cops with ties to white supremacy groups, and most aren't taught de-escalation tactics like our troops are actually taught in a freaking war zone. How do we fix this? Vote in every state and local election, no matter how boring or seemingly insignificant, because those are the people who hire and fire cops, and for decades only scared old white people vote that consistently. If Black Lives Matter to you, always vote. Protestant evangelicals actually have more incidences of molestation and child sex abuse, but the Catholic Church gets special ire because they have a hierarchy, just like the police, that are actively involved in covering it up. This is the same reason why we hold police to a higher standard than that of the oft-repeated black-on-black crime. We gave them legal power over us that the rest of us don't have and expect them to have higher standards to follow and know the law, which often they don't, or they misrepresent the law when arresting people who don't know any better, and not use their power to bully and intimidate or break the law. Most people defending the cops blindly aren't really doing it out of explicit racism. They just want their fantasy of the noble white pure knight that they think the cops are, and their unknown bias allows them to trust cops over black people way easier than it should be. On top of hiring and firing cops, state and local leaders also hire prosecutors and decide the budgets for funding the constitutionally required public defenders. Police and prosecutors work very close together and have camaraderie and mutual deals with each other, so often, assuming they even decide to prosecute a cop, it's often likely that the prosecutor will just give a weak show trial and not present a very strong case against the corrupt cop so he can walk. A grand jury is in general quite fair, but if a prosecutor provides a shoddy case, they will have no choice but to let him walk. Laws requiring an outside prosecutor without ties to the police would reduce this spate of cop-police violence and walking free, and if some cops were actually innocent, they would be able to walk free without a widespread belief by many that the whole system is rigged. The public defender problem is another reason why blacks, especially poor blacks, are so targeted, because they're really easy convictions and make cops look good, and it helps in their promotions. Constitutionally required public defenders are so underfunded in many states that they literally only get 15 minutes to spend with their client and work on their client's case before trial, and half the money spent on prosecutors is spent on defenders. The best the defenders can offer is for their client to plead guilty even if they're 100% innocent. This has for years been a go-to mechanism for solving cases that weren't actually solved, but the cops needed closure to look good. 80% of all people arrested require public defense. Blacks are much more likely to be poor, so they're great targets. An article below shows the disconnect in white America as to how badly they underestimate and don't understand black poverty and pay inequality. This ends up with a disproportionate number of blacks in prison, skews the data on the criminality of African Americans, and increases bias and distrust from whites about blacks. Whites and blacks smoke weed on equal amounts, but blacks are 3.7 times more likely to go to prison, and every income bracket uses drugs equally, but the poor are way more likely to get arrested and imprisoned for drugs than the wealthy and middle class. Whites caught are often given a warning because they're much more likely to clog up the courts with actual legal representation and getting that person off the hook with a technicality. I have a family member who was caught with heroin addiction, who was let off with a year of probation and rehab. I was in shock, though relieved, but had that been a black man, his ass would have been in prison in a heartbeat. If we required laws for equal representation, or at least equal time spent on cases regardless of how much you spent for all cases, you would see the inequality change overnight. It sadly gets way more votes if you look tough on crime by robbing public defenders to pay for more cops and get more convictions. Lastly, we come to the problem of police organizing itself. Many precincts have hierarchies based on seniority in that precinct. If you hate working around fellow corrupt, violent, or racist cops and want to get moved to a different precinct, all your seniority gets stripped. Hypothetically, because people in that precinct know the area better. However, this ensures all the good cops working with senior bad cops are either keeping their mouths shut and heads down so they can do their job as best they can in spite of their fellow horrible cops, or they're all at the bottom in seniority and have problems moving up. Sadly, this systemic racism in the very mechanisms of the justice system is what Black Lives Matter is fighting against. I still have not seen any signs to tell me that Black Lives Matter is a hate group, and the violence and few insulting slogans to cops are anything but assholes being assholes and a fraction of an otherwise caring peaceful activists. If Black Lives Matter actually matters to you, for the love of Pete, please vote in your state and local elections for people who can change these inequalities and hire and fire cops, train them in de-escalation tactics, and actually pay public defenders so every person gets real justice in court. State and local elections may seem boring, but to Black lives, they are a matter between life and death or freedom and modern slavery. Hello. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, rate, and subscribe, and consider supporting me on Patreon. Also feel free to check out my blog. Today's topic discusses the communication of the word racism, and how we need to be aware of the differences between academic and colloquial racism. Thank you.